Good morning from Mexico, Canadian, single female. Thank you for this AMA. You're welcome. Thank you for coming. I wanted to know about the 4% withdrawal rule that I've heard so much about. This is a great question. So the 4% rule is based on an academic study called the Trinity Study that was done by economists at Trinity University. That's where the name comes from. And at the time in the 1990s, a lot of financial advisors were telling retirees they could withdraw 10 or 12% from their investment portfolio per year and live off of that 10 or 12%. But there was a lot of concern among economists that if you're withdrawing 10% per year or even 12% per year, that you'll run out of money, right? And that people would run out of money before they died, which is the worst thing that can happen in retirement. That's the fear, is that your money won't last as long as you're alive, right? Because when you build a portfolio to live on, that's what you need. And this is why the 90s, because in the 1980s, in the US, pensions started to move away from defined benefit pensions. This is where you get paid a set amount from your company. You work at your company for 20 years, you get paid for a set amount for the rest of your life. It's defined benefit. You get paid exactly the same amount every year, no matter how long you live, right? Like the way that Social Security works or the way that national insurance works in the UK. That's a defined benefit pension. But then private companies started moving to something called defined contribution pension. That's the 401k, that's the SIP. So this is where you are given a little bit of money from your employer and you usually match that or you do the employer match and you invest that money in the stock market and then you get what you get. If you make bad investment decisions, you don't get anything. If you make good investment decisions, it can grow to be much, much more than a defined benefit pension would be. So it puts the pressure on the individual to do the investing rather than the company to manage a pension fund. So that's where this 4% withdrawal rule came from, was from this study done to see what percentage could you take out of a portfolio, a stock portfolio, and be guaranteed to not run out of money. And they did it for a 30-year timeline. And they did a 30-year timeline because they're assuming that people retire at 65, and then most people are dead by 95, right? There are a few people that live beyond that, but they were looking for a 30-year window. How much can we be pretty much guaranteed that you're not going to run out of money over 30 years? And if you are in a portfolio of at minimum 50% stocks that are well diversified, so I think the Trinity study was based on using the S&P 500 or a US total market fund. But I recommend if you are not only in the US, that you should be investing in the whole world to avoid single country risk. But if you're in a diversified index portfolio, you need to be at least 50%, minimum of 50% in equities, and then the 4% withdrawal rule works. In fact, it's usually, the outcomes are better if you're 75% in equities. 75 or 80% equities is where we kind of get the sweet spot for sequence of withdrawal risk for not running out of money in retirement. So that's where the 4% withdrawal rule comes from. And if you've ever heard of the FIRE movement, Financial Independence, Retire Early, that's where a lot of my inspiration for investing came from. There's this guy who was writing in the 2000s called Mr. Money Mustache. He has a blog. I read his entire blog when I was ramping up to learning how to invest and to trying to get to where I could retire early. He talks about the 4% withdrawal rule as well. And that's also what basically the entire FIRE community bases the math on. So the idea is if you build up a portfolio large enough, you can take 4% out every year and never run out of money. Now it's true for 30 years. If you are on a longer retirement timeline, like I retired in my early 40s, I'm gonna need more like 40 to 50 years. It's safer to withdraw a little bit less. 4% is still a very good target, but withdrawing 3.5% or 3%, there's no time period in history where 3% withdrawal would have ever run out of money. Like it's incredibly, incredibly safe. But it means that you need a very large portfolio. If you want to live on $40,000 a year, you need $1 million invested. And that seems like astronomical. But here's the thing, you don't have to save $1 million because your money that you invest will double approximately every 7 years. And this is based on the fact the stock market, on average, increases by about 10% per year every year. So when you put money in, you put in, like, let's say you put in $20,000 this year, next year, on average, that's going to be about 10% more, right? And then that interest, that 10% more, is going to keep having interest on top of it. It's compound interest. So particularly if you start investing early, your money will grow much more rapidly than your savings will add to it at some point. It kind of snowballs after a while. So the key is for FI is that you need time. You need to start as soon as possible. The longer your timeline, the more money that you will have. And you need to save as much as you can. The more that you're able to save, the faster you'll get there. The math on the 4% rule comes out to, if you want to retire in 10 years and you have nothing today, you're starting at zero. So you don't have debts, but you don't have assets. If you start today at zero and you want in 10 years to be living off of your portfolio, you need to be investing 65% of your income. And I know that sounds like a lot, but that is what we did, my husband and I. We invested 65% of our income and it actually only took us 8.5, 9 years to get to FI, because we didn't start at zero. We already had a little bit of savings before we started properly investing. So that's the 4% withdrawal rule. The way that you can conceptualize it easily is that if you know how much you spend in a year, so this is where expense tracking comes in, and this is something I talk about all the time. The first step in getting your finances in order is knowing how much your life costs, right? So whether you're in debt, whether you're trying to save more, whether you're looking at retirement, you need to know how much you spend. So if you look through your bank statements and add up the total spend for each month for an entire year, and you figure out what your life actually cost last year or over the past 12 months, then that number is your annual expenses. If you take that number and multiply it by 25, you will get the size that your portfolio needs to be to live off of the 4% rule and live the same quality of life that you're living now.